relationship of sisters. Now, sisters are different than brothers in that brothers have this idea of there's that strife over who's going to be the one who inherits both the physical, objects that the parents own, and also who is going to be the one who continues that father's legacy, so to speak. Women don't have that same fear. Why don't women have those same fear? Because they're not going to inherit, and they're not going to be the ones to continue, and therefore we would expect to have a certain amount, a different dynamic because of that. Now, by the time we get into Breshit 29, which is where we are starting, Cain has killed Hevel, which we saw last week. Yitzchak has pushed out Yishmael. Yaakov has deceived Esav, right? That's it. We've already in Breshit have seen these angst between the brothers, but here by the sisters, we're going to see something different. Not only that, if you think ahead for a minute, does it matter who is the older sister and the younger sister necessarily? Now, yes, it's true that Lavan says we don't let the younger marry before the older. But for the most part, if you remember, when we talk about Benam Slavchad, the daughters of Slavchad who actually do inherit, that's the Chiddush there, a number of times the Torah says their names in different orders. It's not always the same order. Why? Why does the Torah mix around? Because it's irrelevant. And if you remember, King Saul says whoever kills Goliath will marry my daughter. Well, the first daughter, Meirav, was married to somebody else, so he substituted another daughter. You know, they seem to be sort of interchangeable in that way. Now, that's introduction number one. Introduction number two is that Torah really, and we'll talk about this more in a number of weeks, the concept of co-wives, two wives. And Torah is against really polygamy, and we understand that as well, but I want to talk about Rachel and Leah, not as co-wives. I want to look at them in their role as sisters. Okay, so having... So there's no, it was just a way, it was just part of his personality. Anyway, let's begin with source number one. Source number one is our first meeting with Rachel and Leah. Yaakov has had to run away from Esav. He comes out to the well, and remember, all of the shepherds are just standing around, and he's asking them, why are you standing around? Odenu medaber imam, he's still speaking with them. Ve'Rachel ba'a im hatzon asher la'aviha ki ro'a hi. Rachel comes out. Rachel is the one who comes out of the house. She is the shepherdess. Vayhi kasher ra'a Yaakov et Rachel bat Lavan achi imo ve'tzon Lavan achi imo. And when Yaakov sees Rachel with the daughter of Lavan, his mother's brother, with the sheep that belongs to his mother's brother, Vayigash Yaakov vayagel et ha'even. Yaakov is then strong enough to remove the cover of the well, me'al pi haber, vayashak et tzon Lavan achi imo, and he feeds the sheep of his mother's brother. Now, right, in Pasuk Yud, who is the female who's obviously important female in verse 10? Right. In verse 10, it's interesting, you'll notice that it is Rivka who is still the important female, because everything relates around the fact that it is the mother's brother, and she is mentioned 3 times in that verse. Anyway, we jump ahead. Ulalavan shtei banot, Shem hagidola Leah, v'Shem haktana Rachel. And so now we're introduced to Lavan's 2 daughters. Veinei Leah rakot. Leah's eyes were tender. Rachel hayta yifat toar v'yifat mar'eh. But she was very beautiful. Vayeha Yaakov et Rachel. Yaakov loves Rachel. And he says to Lavan, I will work for you for 7 years for your younger daughter named Rachel. ויאמר לבן, טוב תיתי אותה לך ותיתי אותה לאיש אחר ושב עמדי. He said, yeah, I might as well give her to you as opposed to give her to some stranger. It was very common to marry within the family. ויעבוד יעקב ברחל 7 שנים, and so Yaakov works for Rachel 7 שנים, ויהיו בעיניו כימים אחדים באהבתה אותה. And it's, the time flew by in his love for her. Does Rachel love Yaakov? Doesn't say. Okay, that's an important point to recognize. Now, as opposed that we just said that sisters are interchangeable, here we're getting that here we have a distinction between the sisters. The first distinction we have in the sisters is in their age. I don't know if it's different in their appearance. They have a difference in their appearance. And you'll notice that in Pasuk Tet Zayin, one is described as the Gedolah. She is not described as the Bechorah. It's called she is the Gedolah, and the younger one is Rachel. And Rachel is very beautiful. Now, in addition to their physical differences, the next 3 verses also introduce another tension between the sisters. And what is that other tension? The fact that Yaakov loves Rachel. So until that point in time, they're pretty much, happy-go-lucky, interchangeable. But now, as soon as it's Yaakov who loves Rachel, all of a sudden we have a distinction between these 2 sisters. He hasn't even met Leah. That's correct. And now let's talk about Leah's eyes. If you look in source 2 and source 3, source 2 is the Onkelos, who states that her eyes, ve'enei Leah ya'in. Ya'in means beautiful. He explains that we're used to thinking that they were ugly. Onkelos translated as beautiful. And if you look at source 3 is the Rashbam. He also says rakot, na'ot. They were very beautiful. Shaita kala she'eneha na'ot en kol gufa tzarich b'dika. And that is a quote from the Gemara that says that if a bride's eyes are beautiful, I guess it's almost like the horse and the teeth, you don't have to look at anything else. And I think this comes from perhaps the idea that, right? The idea that, we look at the eyes as being the window to the soul. I think that's where it comes from.
Whatever they will wear. I don't know if women in that time period covered everything except
the slits, and maybe that's where it comes from. That's an interesting idea. But what is interesting here is that Rachel, so how would you say if she has nice eyes and Rachel is Yifat Toar v'Yifat Mar'eh, what is the Rashbam telling us about it? That, Leah had her eyes were striking. That's what stood out. As opposed to Rachel, who probably had some an overall beauty. But, that's the distinction until now. And of course, that brings us to Rashi in source 4, which I think is the well-known explanation of this pasuk. Rashi tells us, ve'enei Leah rakot, shaita sfura, I have it for you in English, because she expected to fall into Esav's lot, and she wept, because everyone was saying, Rebecca has 2 sons, Lavan has 2 daughters, the older daughter for the older son, and the younger daughter for the younger son. Rashi's interpretation here, he is suggesting that Leah's eyes, she was not born with this kind of eyes, but that her eyes were red and weepy from constant crying. And why was she crying so much? Because she expected to have to marry Esau. She does not want to marry Esau. That's not where she sees her life going. And she spent her days crying out to God in prayer that God should save her from that idea. So that if you use Rashi's explanation, we would say, what's the difference in verse 17 between Leah and Rachel? What's the difference?
who they belong.
Who they're supposed to belong to, and how they feel about that. And Rachel might have been beautiful, but Leah is, what word would you use? If she's bemoaning the fact of falling into Esav's hands, you're saying that Leah is.
No, but she's good and she's.
I think I used the term pious, perhaps. Okay, right, that Leah, that becomes her distinct thing, is that she has this fear of falling into the hands of a.
So what is Rachel? What's the opposite?
So I don't think Rachel is the opposite of pious. Rachel's not, we don't know how she feels. That's an important point. And her description of her outward presence. Now, this could also explain on a very practical level. Why is Rachel the one who's taking the sheep out?
If he was so rich, he'd have shepherds.
So apparently not. Apparently not. Well, he didn't trust him. But why is Rachel going out with the sheep and not?
See that.
That's right, and not Leah. Apparently, Leah's eyes were tender. That's exactly right. And the sun was probably not good for that. So she had to stay indoors, whereas Rachel was okay going out with the outdoors. Go ahead.
How would we know Esau from Joe Schmo?
I agree.
So it's interesting you asked that question because Rashi,
The question.
the answer is, how does she know about Esav and how does she know what kind of man Esav is? So first of all, there are no phones, but there are peddlers who move from place to place. And apparently, Rashi says that Leah did investigation. You know, she did research to find out what kind of guy he was. Yes, on the internet. And she found out, and that really turned her off. And then, of course, we know what happens. We know that Lavan decides to give Leah to Yaakov instead of Rachel. And so that brings us to source number 5 on the top of page 2. Vayi be'erev, vayikach et Leah bito, vayavel ita elav, vayavo eleha. Vayiten Lavan, so that night Lavan brings Leah instead of Rachel. Vayiten Lavan et Zilpa shifchato Leah bito shifcha, and he gives the older of his maidservants as part of the deception. No, the younger. Zilpa is the younger maidservant, and he gives it as part of the deception. Vayhi baboker, and all of a sudden this morning, vihinehi Leah, and behold, it's Leah. Vayome el Lavan. So Yaakov says to Lavan, Maza asitali, halo barachal avadati mach, v'lama rimitani. He says, but I worked for you all those years for Rachel. Why did you deceive me? Vayome Lavan, lo yasaken b'mkomenu l'tetat se'ira l'fnei ha'bechira. Now, I don't want to get into the whole deception because our discussion. No, so that's a different one second. We'll get to that in a minute. But here, what I really want to discuss is I want to discuss the role of the two women here. Now, you all know the Megillah, the Gemara in Megillah, which appears in source 6. You all know this Gemara. Let's just look at it inside. What was the modesty displayed by Rachel? As it's written, and Yaakov told Rachel that he was his father's brother. Now, was he her father's brother? Was he not the son of her father's sister? Rather, Yaakov said to Rachel, will you marry me? She replied, yes, but my father is a trickster, and you cannot outwit him. He replied, I am his brother in trickery. She said to him, is it permitted for the righteous to engage in trickery? He said, yes. With the pure you act in purity, and with the perverse you act widely. So he said to her, what is his trickery? She replied, I have a sister older than me, and he will not let me marry before her. So he gave her certain tokens. When night came, she said to herself, now my sister will be put to shame. So she handed over the tokens to her. So it is written, and it came to pass, and in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And up until now, she was not Leah. Rather, what it means is on account of the tokens which Rachel gave to Leah, he did not know until then. Right, you've all heard the story, you all know the story, and let's analyze the story for a minute from Rachel's perspective. What does Rachel do here for her sister?
He saved her from Esau.
She saves her sister from Esav.
Embarrassed.
She saves her sister from embarrassment. And what about herself? What does Rachel do for herself? Correct. Rachel, that's a good term. Rachel is sacrificing herself. In what way is Rachel sacrificing herself for the benefit of her sister?
She was meant to be married and she's not.
She was meant to be married and now she's not.
It might be that therefore she might have to marry Asa.
Right.
Because that's.
Correct. That leaves her sort of vulnerable, first of all. Secondly, let's take this even a step further. According to the Ramban, and we had this discussion a number of years ago, did the Avot keep Torah? And the Ramban's position is that the Avot kept Torah only in the land of Israel. Now, you know there's a biblical command that you're not allowed to be married to two sisters. So when Yaakov is living in Haran, that's fine. As soon as he comes back to the land of Israel, what happens? Rachel dies. So according to this opinion, not only is she sacrificing her husband for her sister, if we take it to the extreme, she's actually sacrificing her life.
She might not,
She might not have known that. She might not have known that, but I think we certainly understand that she certainly knows that she is sacrificing. And I think how much she's sacrificing, I don't know if she knows. But I think it's clear that she understands that by her giving over these signs to her sister, she is making a sacrifice for her sister. And I think everybody, that's clear. Now, in a way, you can say that's sort of almost a tikkun for Cain and Hevel, where he says, am I my brother's keeper? And here, this is a beautiful example of a sister being her sister's keeper. But now I want to throw another question out to you. How about Leah? How about Leah in this situation? What should Leah perhaps have done in this situation?
yeah.
Perhaps Leah should have turned to Yaakov and said,
I could have told you, but I'm choosing not to.
I'm going to be honest, I'm not Rachel.
The fact that he couldn't tell them apart is like, it's its own.
That's a whole, I'm not going there.
Why, you wake up in the morning?
Very dark.
It's very dark. Maybe they were twins.
New moon.
Maybe.
Maybe they were twins. But I want to ask you another question. We're all so used to thinking about Rachel and her sacrifice in this situation. We don't necessarily analyze here, well, how do we look at Leah in this situation? So you're saying Leah could have turned to Yaakov and said to him, I'm not who you think I am. She could have turned to her father, perhaps. Let's understand something. In order for this little trick to go down, who has to be party to this trick? Leah has to be party, Rachel has to be party, and Lavan, and the handmaids. Right? There are a lot of people involved in order to make this trickery work. And so we sort of have to ask this question, why is Leah willing to allow her sister to sacrifice for her? Why doesn't she turn around? Because I could see where it goes like this. If the younger marries first, then the people say, well, there must be something wrong with the older, and then she's never going to get married. I could hear that. Especially knowing all these different, rules, whatever, about getting, shidduchim and whatever. But at the same time, why do you think Leah doesn't have that? It seems to be she doesn't have that same sensitivity sort of to Rachel that she has.
I don't know if I've never felt happy about that with that. If you have a favorite sister.
So you're asking, I think you're asking, if I'm understanding, I think you're also asking even a deeper question. Essentially, Leah is going into a marriage knowing that she tricked him and that he doesn't love her.
Same face, I need to.
Oh, so maybe that's why it has to be that way. So that's for different shir. But I want to, my shir is I want to understand this dynamic between Rachel and Leah. So my question is, how come Leah is willing to do this to Rachel? And even more now, I just asked him, how come Leah is willing to do this to herself?
But Becky,
Rachel had to have given it over there. You can imagine even a conversation that went on that said, no, I can't do this. Yes, I want you to do this. No, I can't. It's not fair to you. I mean, it could also be, I'm giving this to you. Oh, okay, that's great. Or it could have been a whole give and take, backwards and forwards, and you don't know what the.
Right, and as a matter of fact, let me take that a step further. There is actually a midrash that says, "Vayhi boker v'hine Leah." There's even a midrash that says, to the extent that Rachel came into the room, hid under the bed, and she's the one who answered, so that he didn't even hear her voice. Now, whether that's practical or not, that's not the point. The midrash is showing us how much Rachel was willing to do in order to help Leah succeed. So I'm going to suggest to you two answers to this question about Leah. Answer number one comes from Rav Shlomo Shradron. It's a very hard name to say. You tell me what you think of it. He says like this: Rachel did not have the heart to tell Leah that, you know what, Yaakov doesn't really want to marry you, because why would Leah even agree to that? So Rachel tells Leah that Yaakov wants to really marry you. But you know what? You need to know something. She says, I know that the tokens were not actual pieces of paper. The tokens were the 3 mitzvot that were given to women: challah, hadlakat ner, and nida, which we know were the miracles in Sarah's house. And so Rachel says to Leah, these, you just have to know, when you're marrying into the family, this is what you need to know. She doesn't say it's a sign. She doesn't say it's part of the trickery. She says, this is, knowledge that you need to know before you get married. And she does this in order to save Leah's dignity. Yaakov says to her under the chuppah, and what is going to be in our house? She says, we're going to keep challah, hadlakas ner, and nida. Not because she's giving over signs, but because she's just sort of agreeing to him that this is what's going to happen in our house. And that Leah is under the impression the whole time that Yaakov wants to marry her. And what is the proof of that? And we're going to see that inside. Remember, when Reuven comes home with the Dudaim, what does Leah say to Rachel? It's not enough you took my husband. Well, who took whose husband? But if Leah never knows that she was not meant to be, she never knows that it was part of the trickery, and that takes Rachel's involvement to a new level, but it also helps us to understand Leah's position. You buy it?
No, I don't get it. Wait a second.
Why not?
Knows.
That Leah never knows that she's being tricked, that Yaakov's being tricked. And so
Wait, so Leah's under the chuppah.
Leah's under the chuppah, and she thinks Yaakov wants to marry her.
Where did she get that idea?
Rachel convinced her. Her father convinced her. Right. So I tell you the reason.
Why would never have had a discussion? Why would Rachel know that without her knowing that? It's like a little bit of a stretch.
Right, and I also have, and I tell you, well, my problem is also it said very clearly in the pasuk that Yaakov loved Rachel. To me, it was an interesting thing that I'm sharing with you. I personally don't necessarily buy it either.
Might be a case of wanting to do that.
Okay, so
if you really want to believe something, you can talk yourself into.
I am going to present a second explanation a little bit later, so keep it on the burner. Let's continue with our story in source number 7. In source number 7, it continues the story. Vayavo gam et Rachel, vayehav gam et Rachel milea, vayavdu imo od 7 shanim acherot. So there is your answer. It is not another 7 years. This time he marries her and then works the 7 years. Okay? And the pasuk clearly says, vayav gam et Rachel. And here comes pasuk 31, which presents to us another problem. Vayar Hashem ki snu'a le'ah, vayiftach et rachma ve'rachal akara. And now we're getting the second distinction between our sisters. This sister is fertile, and this sister is loved. okay? And you basically have a conflict almost between those two qualities. And these sisters who originally were together are now almost being pitted against each other because they both want what the other has. It's not love. Rachel wants the children, and Leah wants the love.
To know if they would have given up what they've got to get the other thing, what they wanted also.
Do they want also? We'll talk about that in a minute.
I find it difficult to understand that Leah is suddenly having all of these children, but it's taken 7 years for the first one to be born. So that's why.
No.
But that's why I don't go along with the 7-year period.
He works 7 years.
Yeah.
He marries Leah.
Yeah.
A week later, he marries Rachel. That's what happens. And then he works the 7 years. That's exactly what happens. And then, first of all, you also know that there's a biblical law that a man cannot live with a woman he hates. So when the pasuk says that she is snu'ah, how is it that Yaakov can remain married to a woman he hates? Anyway, before we answer that question, let's continue looking at the psukim, because the name of her children tell us her pain. Vatahar Leah, Vatele Ben, Vatikushmo Reuven. She becomes pregnant, she gives birth to her first son, and she calls him Reuven, Ki Omra, Ki Ra'ah Hashem et Oni. She recognizes it's God who sees my suffering. Ki Ata Ye'ahaveni Ishi. Now maybe my husband will love me, indicating that she feels unloved. Vatahar Od, Vatele Ben, Vatomer, Ki Shama Hashem, Ki Snu'a Anochi. You don't have to get any more obvious than that. She says, God has heard that I am hated, Vayiten li gam et zeh, and he gives me also this one, Vatikushmo Shimon, that Hashem heard. Vatar Od, and she has another son, Vatele Ben, Vayoma Ataha Pam Yilave Ishi, Elai. He yaladati lo shlosha banim al ken karashmo Levi. And she has another son, and she says, this son will make my husband attached to me. And then she has a fourth son, and she names him Yehuda Vatamod Miledet. Now let's look at the Ramban in source 8. The Ramban says Leah was hated. After all, she lied to, and look at the sentence, she betrayed both Yaakov and her sister. I thought that was fascinating that, remember we spoke about how Rachel goes sacrifices for her sister. The Ramban, in sort of a backhand way here, says that what Leah does is not only trick or betray is the term he uses, betrays Yaakov, she betrays her sister. And even if she could not have defied her father when he brought her to the wedding, could she not have told Yaakov or signaled to him that she was Leah? And she hid her identity from the entire night. And that is why Yaakov hated her. And he adds, God knew that Leah did it all so she could marry the righteous Yaakov, and this is why he had pity on her. Here is your second explanation. Your second explanation, according to Ramban, is that what was Leah's goal? Leah's goal was not her own happiness. Leah's goal was to be part of the establishment of Am Yisrael. And if Rachel was willing to sacrifice for her sister, Leah is willing to sacrifice for the whole future and her happiness. And we see here the pain, though, that she felt. But let's also read source number 9, because this is what you referred to earlier. Source number 9 says, wait a minute, and it was the morning, and it was Leah. He said to her, Yaakov said to her, you are a deceiver, the daughter of a deceiver. Is there a teacher without pupils? She retorted. Did not your father call you Esav, and you answered him? So did you call me Rachel, and I answered you. This is a perfect example of what we would call karma, right? What goes around comes around. But let's take it on a deeper level. And I'm going to throw this out because this is not our topic, but I feel like I need to say it for a minute. The original plan was there was supposed to be 3 4 forefathers and 4 foremothers. It was supposed to be Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esav, Sarah, Rachel, Rivka, and Leah. That was supposed to be 4 and 4. Esav uses his free choice and chooses out. Everybody in the world has free choice. He chooses out. So now I have a problem. I have this extra woman. Now, there are a number of different ways Yaakov could have received Esav's portion. As a matter of fact, this was an argument that Rivka and Yitzchak were having. Yitzchak thought, you know what? Would it be so bad if one of our forefathers was a little bit strong, knew how to use weapons? Would that be so terrible if the Jews knew how to defend themselves? And Leah and Rivka,
I'm certain you there.
that's right. And Rivka also says, having grown up in the house of Lavan, she says, a Yaakov can learn to be like an Esav, but an Esav can never learn to be like Yaakov. And that's why she dresses Yaakov up as Esav. But as soon as Yaakov receives Esav's blessing through trickery, he also receives his wife through trickery. Okay, that's a different discussion. Anyway, but that's what she says to him. Just think about it. That's what she says to him. You know, when you are you are the deceiver, the daughter of a deceiver, she says, is there a teacher without pupils? Since you deceived your father that way, so therefore you received me that way. Anyway, by God opening up Leah's womb, he's also advancing here a source of discord among the sisters. And that brings us, of course, to source number 10. Source number 10, Vatere Rachel ki lo yalda Yaakov, vatikane Rachel be'achota. Now, we spoke about Esav, Cain and Hevel both being jealous of each other, but the term jealousy didn't even show up in those verses. Here, the pasuk clearly tells us that Rachel is jealous of her sister. Vatomer el Yaakov, havali banim vim ein ayin meta anochi. She says, if you don't give me children, I'm going to die. Vayichar af Yaakov berachel. And then Yaakov gets mad at Rachel. Vayomer hatachat elokim anochi. Am I in the place of God? Hashem manami mech pri betnem. Am I the one who has prevented you to have children? I've got children. You know, it's not me. It's obviously you. Now, yeah, let's notice something. By the way, this is the only conversation that we have of Yaakov and Rachel. First of all. Secondly, how do we understand this jealousy of Rachel? According to the Psukim also, what's bothering her? What is bothering her?
It's his fault. No, but her sister has.
It's her sister has, and
She doesn't.
she doesn't. Right. You see here, this is a desire. She's not looking out for Yaakov's interest. Yaakov has children. Right? When Sarah gives Hagar,
Hold on to in this culture.
that's right. She has, but
And that goes into the relationship.
that's right. But let's understand, why does she want children? Let's make this clear. She wants children.
She wants to be part
What?
of those interests as well.
We get that, and we don't blame her, and we understand her pain. But let's understand that, suppose we talked about Leah, who had this, future here. Rachel is looking out for her own interests. Now, if we look at source 11, I think source 11 is a midrash that you're all familiar with. The midrash here says, when Rachel saw that she bore Yaakov no children, Rachel envied her sister. Rabbi Yitzchak observed, is it written, let not thy heart envy sinners? Yet you say Rachel envied her sister? This, however, teacher, that she envied her good deeds reasoning. Were she not righteous, she would not have borne children. What is the midrash doing here? What is it doing, first of all, to her jealousy? You know that halakha says you cannot be jealous of people. Jealousy is an ugly midah. There is one type of jealousy, though, that's considered a good midah, and that is if you're jealous of somebody's learning good deeds, and
Bingo.
it strives you to be better in your service of God because you want to be like them. So what does the Medrash do? The Medrash takes the jealousy of Rachel and turns it into that positive type of jealousy. Now, why do you think the Medrash does this?
What is this thing of making that voted?
I don't think it's only because of, we want to make them unsinnable. I think it's more, remember, if we talked about a woman who was so willing to sacrifice for her sister, it's hard to come around that one morning she turns around and decides that today she's jealous. If she was jealous from her sister to begin with, she never would have given her the signs. So I think Chazal say it doesn't necessarily fit with her personality. Having said that, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, though, the way look at the sentence that she says, Havali banim im ayin meta anochi. What about you going to die? He says, this is the cry of a pained human being. The shriek of hopelessness and despair was uttered only once and never repeated. He says it almost comes from like this place where she can't even, she can't control it. She's so desperate, and I think that's the term, that she behaves in a way that is not usual to her character. And what? She's distraught. And when somebody's in that position, we almost understand that kind of behavior. Now, I think you'll notice, by the way, Rachel is not jealous of the love that Yaakov has for Leah. That's right. What is it that she is jealous of? She is jealous of those children. Correct. And the answer, by the way, that Yaakov gives to Rachel, how do you feel about that answer?
It's not very empathetic.
No, it is not very empathetic.
That's really Sarah.
Chana and Elkanah, that's right.
Directly to Hashem, whereas she is, asking Yaakov to pray to Hashem on her.
Right, which is exactly the answer, by the way, that we see in 12 and 13. In 12, Rashi says, give me children. Is this how your father and mother acted? Did your father not pray for your mother? Or shall I die? From here is the notion that those who have no children are considered as dead. God has withheld from you. You are telling me to Yaakov. Yaakov says, you are telling me to act like my father. I am not in the same situation. My father had no children at all, and I have children. It's God who has prevented you from having children. Ibn Ezra, source 13. Am I in place of God? Am I the one who decides these things? It is possible that Yaakov prayed, but he had not yet been answered. And the Ramban. Why did Yaakov get angry? Why did he say, am I in place of God? Doesn't God listen to the righteous? Doesn't the righteous pray on behalf of the others? And the Medrash expresses disapproval. Is this how one responds to those who suffer? In truth, she thought that out of his love for her, he would clothe himself in sackcloth and ashes and pray for her. Yaakov got angry because she spoke in the way of hysterical, trying to frighten him with threats of death. And this, of course, brings us back to Rabbi Soloveitchik. Anyway, I think that at this point in time, whereas the sisters began almost as a unit, we're beginning to see perhaps a little tear in this unit. But having said that, let's go to source 15. Source 15 is our story of Reuven and the Judaim. וילך ראובן בימי קציר החיצים, וימצא דודים בשדה, ויבא גם אותם אלי אמו, ותאמר רחל, אלי תני נא לי מדורי בנך. Reuven goes out to the fields, he finds these flowers, whether the flowers were, by the way, sort of a fertility drug, or some sort of love potion, or even some commentators will say they were like eye drops. Whatever they were, Rachel turns to Leah and says to her, give me some of those Judaim. Vatomer la, and Leah says to her, Hama'at katech et ishi, v'lakachet et Judaei bani. Is it not that you've taken my husband, then now you want to take my flowers? Vatomer Rachel lechein yishkav imach halayla tachat tudei vanech. And Rachel says, well, let's make a deal. And she trades Yaakov for the flowers. Now, what I want to show you here, which is interesting, is even if there was a tear between the sisters, what does it show in this conversation? In this conversation, we see that the sisters know how to act again together as a unit against Yaakov. This is the second time they're doing it. The first time the two sisters acted together to trick him into marrying Leah, and now they don't ask Yaakov where he's going to spend the night. They don't ask Yaakov what he wants. The two of them, even if you want to say they, were jealous of each other, whatever it is, here the two of them are willing to act together. Why? Why are the two of them willing to act together? Because each one is getting what they think that they want. Leah is getting her husband, and Rachel is getting what she hopes is going to bring her about some, right. But what happens at the end of the story? Leah remains unloved. Rachel remains barren. So that neither, although they have this plan, the two of them have this little plan together, it doesn't necessarily get them what they want.
Interesting, this is the only conversation.
Correct. This is the only conversation we have between the two of them, which sort of has them working together at Yaakov's expense.
She's got no children. She's got all these four nephews running around. And it must have been to Sarah hard.
It must have been very hard for her. And then remember, of course, she gives over her maidservant. Her maidservant, remember, has a child who she names Naphtali. Naphtali, the name Naphtali is, I have struggled mightily with my sister and I have succeeded. That's what she names Naphtali. Rachel's concubine's son. Rachel names him Naphtali with the name representing that conflict between the sisters. But then we get something really interesting. We get this idea that in we'll go verse 16. I didn't bring you the verses, but that's okay. Eventually, right, we have the birth of 10 children. And then it says, Vayizkar Elokim et Rachel. And God remembered Rachel. He remembered it to her as a merit that she had transmitted the secret signs to her sister, and that she was greatly troubled lest she fall into Esav's lot if Yaakov would divorce her because she was childless. And indeed, this had entered Esav's mind when he heard that she was childless. And the poet refers to this in the Tfilot of Yamin Noraim. Here, this adds more things to our broth. So first of all, it says here that God remembered Rachel and makes her pregnant. Not only just to give her children, here Rashi introduces another thing, that before Rachel saves Leah from falling into Esav's lot. Here Rashi explains that when Rachel is barren, even though she knows that Yaakov loves her, she has this fear that if she has no children, then Yaakov will divorce her. And what will happen if she is divorced? Esav will marry her. Okay, I don't know necessarily if that takes it all the way, but that brings us to source 17. Source 17 tells us, and afterwards, Leah bore a daughter. We learned, if for instance, one's wife is pregnant, and he says, may it be thy will that my wife bears a son, it is considered a vain prayer. You're not allowed to say a prayer which is considered a vain prayer, which means you can't pray about something that already happened. You can't change the past. So if a woman is pregnant, you can't say, may she be her wife because to have a son, because whatever it is, it already is. So then the school of Rabbi Yanai says, this was taught of one who actually is about to give birth. Rabbi Reuben Pasi says, even when she was actually about to give birth, the sex can be changed. As it says, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as the potter You know this from Rosh Yom Kippur, Kachomer B'yad Yotzer. Says the Lord, behold, as the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. An objection was raised, but it is written, and afterwards she, Leah, bore a daughter. Rabbi Abba replied, actually, Dinah was created a male, but she was turned into a female through Rachel's prayers. When she said, the Lord add to me another son, said Rabbi Hanina ben Pazi. The matriarchs were prophetesses, and Rachel was a matriarch. Is it not written, the Lord add me another son, not other sons, but other sons? She said, he is yet destined to beget me one more. May it be from me. All the matriarchs assembled and prayed. We have sufficient males. Let Rachel be remembered. Now, what does this Medrash tell us? Essentially, this Medrash tells us that Leah is pregnant with her 7th son. Leah has 6. Each one of the concubines has 2. If Leah has a 7th son, what does that leave? That only leaves 1 son for Rachel, less than the concubines. So Leah prays that the child in her womb should be female, so that Rachel can have the son. And the Medrash says that the fetuses sort of switched. Rachel was pregnant with a female, Leah is pregnant with a male, and it switches. Leah has the female, and Rachel has Yosef. Now, how does that change when we're talking? Remember, we're talking about this now. By the way, they even use this medrash today for halacha in terms of IVF, outside the womb. But let's leave that. What does this tell us there about the relationship again between Rachel and Leah? I think it's very interesting here. It says that Leah has 6 sons, and she's able to say, okay, Nachon, Adkan, Nachon, I want my sister to have something. I want her to be able to have and to be on the same level as the Shvachot. And I love the sentence that all the matriarchs assembled and prayed. So just the way Rachel gave something up for her sister, now Leah is giving something up from her sister. And if we put it together with the Rashi, in order to save her, just the way Rachel saved Leah from Esav, Leah saved Rachel from Esav. So there's another example of your karma. Then our next example comes in source 18. In source 18, Yaakov sends to Rachel and Leah. Here they are back as a team, and he says to them, it's time to leave. And in verse 14, Vata'an Rachel and Leah. If they're both answering, the word should be Vata'anu. They answered. Vata'an is singular, Rachel and Yud, and the Tomarna is plural. But it seems to be that Rachel and Leah are answering as a unit, and together as a unit, again, we see them working together to reject their father. Okay? Notice that. Skipping on to 19 is when Yaakov meets Esav. And here's where it starts getting interesting. Yaakov is going to meet Esav. V'hinei Esav ba, and he has 400 men. And what does Yaakov do? Vayachetz et hayiladim al Leah va'al Rachel va'al shnei hashvachot. What does he do? He separates the family. And as opposed to the brothers, Yaakov and Esav, what's going to happen to them at this meeting? Yaakov and Esav are reconciling. But Leah and Rachel are being separated. And that brings us to source 20. Source 20 is after the meeting with Esav. Vayas'umi Beit El, vayihi od kivrat haaretz lavo Ephrata, vateled Rachel v'takesh beledata. Her prayer is answered. What was her prayer? That she have child. And what did her prayer cause? Her death. Right. She got what she wanted, and it caused her death. The midwife says, don't worry, this is also a son. And when she's dying, she names him Ben Oni, but Yaakov renames him ben Binyamin, vatamet Rachel, vatikaver b'derech Efratah, he Beit Lechem Yehuda, and she dies on the road. So she dies when her prayer is answered. Interestingly enough, who else almost dies with Rachel at this point in time? Leah. We never hear about Leah again. We don't know when Leah died. We don't know when Leah was buried. We do get one mention later on that we know that Leah was buried in Merat HaMachpelah. But essentially, this is one of the reasons I want to prove to you that this is a sister story. As soon as one sister dies, the other sister's narrative also disappears with her. And as opposed to the other brothers, where there's some sort of reconciliation, right? Ishmael and Yitzchak reconcile, Yaakov and Esav reconcile, Yosef and his brothers reconcile. It seems to be that here, the sisters don't reconcile. And who seems to have been the more successful sister here? Leah. That's correct. Leah seems to be the more a successful sister in that she becomes the mother of the 6 tribes. She is the one who's buried in the Marat HaMachpelah. And if you look at source number 21, source number 21 goes back to the pasuk that we said. Remember that Leah is called the elder, the Gdolah. She was great in her gifts. She receives the priesthood and the royalty. And the name of the younger was Rachel. She was small in her gifts. She got Yosef, who was ruler for a time, Shaul, who was a ruler for time. And in the last few minutes that we have, what I do want to discuss is, why do we need both of them? What role do they both have? So first of all, Rev Adin Steinsaltz tells us in source 22, fundamentally, we have 2 kinds of love in all of their complexity. There's a romantic love that draws its sustenance from longing, from separation and distance, from premature death. A love full of expectation, dreams, and memories. And if you look, by the way, in the medieval sonnets, all of the romantic sonnets, and even Romeo and Juliet, their love is never consummated. It's only a romantic love that never develops beyond that. And that is the love of Rachel and Yaakov. On the other hand, we have the love of a faithful woman. The woman who remains beside her husband, works and struggles in the daily round with him, bears him most of his children, and whose love and constant, stable, and real. Leah's relationship was without the drama, the elation and the dejection that was characterized his love for Rachel. In a sense, Rachel was the romantic, and Leah was the mature and faithful wife. Which brings me to an idea I'm not necessarily sure I understand, but I'm going to present it to you. According to the Kabbalistic opinion, Rachel and Leah were of the same soul. Now, Leah represents now there are 2 types of tzaddikim in the world. You know, the tzaddik nister and the tzaddik nigla. Now, we're used to thinking the tzaddik nigla wears a t-shirt that says tzaddik, and the tzaddik nister doesn't. But that's not the way it works. A tzaddik nigla is the tzaddik who is involved with the trees, and the tzaddik nister is the guy who's involved in the forest. Rachel is what? The nigla, the nistar. Rachel is the nigla. Why is Rachel in the nigla? First of all, she's the one who comes out with the sheep. Where is she buried? On the road. What is she involved in? She's involved in the trees. Get what comes to be now. Leah represents the nistar. She's the one who's looking at the long term. She's looking at the future. She's the one who stays home. She's the one who's buried inside in the Merat HaMachpelah. So that the 2 of them represent 2 different types of goals, perhaps to say. And Rabbi Soloveitchik continues with this idea and says, Leah, the name Leah, what does the name Leah mean? The name Leah means drained. Why is Leah drained? Because she's got too many kids. But she was even drained before she had the kids. Leah is drained because she is the one who has the initiative. She's the one who's supposed to marry Esav, and instead of taking that, she is the one who turns to prayer to God. And according to Rabbi Soloveitchik, she knew that she was tricking Yaakov, and she knew that Yaakov didn't want her, but she was able to see the forest rather than the trees, and that is she's somebody who symbolizes what characteristic is that? Somebody who's able, it's not necessarily what's about them, it's about everybody else and the good of everybody else and fighting for what you want. That is the midah of Gevura. What midah does Rachel have what does the word Rachel mean according to Rabbi Soloveitchik? Rachel is a sheep. Rachel is the sheep. What characteristic does a sheep have? The sheep is the follower. The sheep is the one who lives in somebody else's shadow. And according to him, that Rachel is sort of involved in the chesed. It's not about me, it's about somebody else. Here's your Kabbalah. If you have Gevura, which is Leah, and you have chesed, which is Rachel, when you combine chesed with Gevura, what midah do you get? Anybody know? You get Tiferet, which is the midah of Yaakov. And that's why he needed the two wives to complement the midah of Tiferet. And finally, to sort of, if we had to finish this off, let's look at source 23. Source 23 is the pasuk in Ruth, that Vayomu kol ha'am asher b'shar, right? All the people in the city say, V'hazikenim, edim yitain Hashem et ha'isha haba'a el beitacha. May God bless this woman that she should be just like Rachel and Leah. And here notice whose name is first. And of course we would not be fair if we did not mention, of course, the Midrash that you all know, that I didn't bring it because it's so well known, that why was Rachel buried on the road? So that when the children of Leah go into exile, who is it who prays for them on behalf? It's Rachel. And when God says to her, God says to all the other folk, no, 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 I'm not going to listen. Rachel says to God, if I was not jealous of my sister and I am a basar v'dam, how could you, God, be jealous of avodah zarah? And God says to her, yesh schar lefulatech, there is a reward for your actions, v'shavu vanim ligvulam. And then let us just end with the idea that though this tension, and that's what we have through the sisters, sometimes we have them working together, sometimes we have them fighting with each other, but at the same time, it doesn't end with Rachel and Leah. Remember, we're ultimately going to have two messiahs. We have the Mashiach ben Yosef, and we also have the Mashiach ben David. And it's only when the two of them are going to work together that it's going to be that redemption.
It's sad, so like the stories of Leah, Rachel, all the stories are sad.
It is sad, and it's interesting because when we look at them also as individuals, we sometimes don't understand the complexity that they are in. And, I think it gives us a new perspective on the story.
They're just vessels to the universe going on.
Yes, but yet we notice these women do have opinions. And these women do manipulate situations in the way that they think.
Sassy in the background as opposed to living up there in the.
But they're getting what they want, but they're never happy. So
Right.
like they never choose happiness, they're getting what they want. but
Right, and that's the thing, I think that's what,
And
right, but I think also that's like, so many people think that if I get this, I'll be happy, right? If I get that, I'll be happy.
It's- they're not happy.
Right, and you think that if I get that,
Yeah.
it's gonna be, and she gets the child, but she ends up dead.
it's because they go back into.
Is it what you said, that she sacrifices that? It all comes together.
They're just happy with our love. Like to just say, this is my life, Lord, that's all. Having
Right.
all of these children, what a blessing.
Right,
There's a show that passed on
Very-
television called The Serpent Who Was After Another.
Okay.
I think somebody was, I think it was gonna give it a recomposite. How long I grow, and she's like, I don't know, person, that conniving was six.
But I say, I think this gives us a whole, look, it gives us a whole new way of looking at these stories and these people and,
Yeah.
what they do.
But it was, I mean, then that one specifically, Sarah, was she happy? Was she happy?
She laughs.
She loves, yeah.
She was still laughing.
Okay.
But that's, you know, it's interesting. I think happiness, by the way, and this desire for happiness, it's very new also. You know, it's a new concept, where anybody in the Medieval village is happy, that's a fucking.
Yeah, they did.